Hi. Thank you for attending today's reading. Let's begin. The odd relationship I have with my sister. A couple of months ago, I had an emotional meltdown, and my sister took me to my parents' bedroom. My mom left to give the both of us some privacy. Then I told my sister I was going insane and was extremely depressed. She then proceeded to say shit like, sleep 8 hours a day, eat healthy food, force your sad ass to socialize, and force yourself to befriend people simply because say they like you, even though you don't like them back. And then she said this, it'll cure your depression instantly. And when I tried questioning her, she told me to shut up, and said shit like how Shush is more superior and better than me. Simply because Shush is in uni and lived for 21 years of her life. It's always like that with my family members. I try to ask a question. They tell me to shut up, and say stuff that makes me feel extremely inferior. And in the end it doesn't help because all they do is make themselves look either ignorant or arrogant, or both. I don't think depression is cured instantly. Not in my case. End of story. Next story. I had a literal 1 in a million experience with another Olive Garden customer. That you will not believe. I had to share this story. I simply could not leave this statistical improbability of a real-life event only to my own self. Now for context. Mind that I am the only one with my last name within a circumference of about 5 states bare minimum from where I live. So, there was a lone family member randomly visiting the city of Louisville with my last name. And he never bothered to tell any of us. The guy apparently visited from far away. Ordered the exact same things as me. At the exact same time. The food was finished cooking at the exact same time. And rightth as my order was being taken out for delivery, his was being set out for pickup. He showed up, and ended up picking up my food and I was delivered his. I did not know it was even a relative till calling to get a description of the person. Because I wanted to know whether someone tried to impersonate me and steal my food. Considering my neighbors used my address to order Pizza Hut and people have stolen my identity. Literal hundreds of times before. It was reasonable that someone used my info from my receipt to attempt to steal my food. Turns out, it was, in fact, a random family member visiting the city without notifying anyone else in our family. He had an alcoholic beverage and a Sprite in his order. The only difference. And the delivery driver did not card me. Had I been underage, this would have been a felony. This guy's order was literally the same as mine, with the only difference being the type of soup and the margarita. I had considered ordering a drink myself. This is such a statistical improbability. That another person with my last name would be visiting. Order the same thing as me. At the same time. Our orders being finished at the same time. Him picking up right as mine is delivered. Us getting each other's orders. The fact that no other people with my last name live within 5 states or so. And that this would happen on the same day and time of the week. This borderlines on impossibility. And at first I believed that someone recorded my phone call and stole my food. Because the actual truth turned out to be far less believable. End of story. Next story. Yearbooks and homeschooling were the clues to kids who vanished. I lasted about 3 years as a substitute teacher. I would fill in at this one school just about every day. The school was mostly made up of a minority population and the school was in a very impoverished area. It was nearly impossible for the school to keep permanent teachers. The kids really suffered from the lack of having a consistent teacher knowing the kids' quirks and their idiosyncrasies. Also, unfortunately, the teacher was the only assurance for some of the kids to see their basic needs were being met. I really wanted the kids to feel safe, and it broke my heart seeing them unkempt, nervous, emotionally unavailable. Some of the kids were so quiet that they were almost forgotten. The bad kids instinctually knew in order to get their basic needs met they needed to do something to garner attention. I class hopped all year long, but I would spend a few days at a time in each class. I finished my first year and had a sense of fulfillment that I made it through the whole year. The summer went by fast and the next year started. Now I felt like a seasoned veteran, and I picked up on more trends of the school and the kids. I did the same thing as the previous year. I went from class to class. I was a little disappointed that some of the kids moved on to private schools or were switched to being homeschooled. But ultimately it may have been in their best interest. About halfway through the year, 2 of the students were taken out of the school to be home-schooled. I learned this when I would take roll call and their names were crossed out from the list. I was surprised the 2 kids were being homeschooled, because the 2 kids had issues with their basic needs being met. I tried to give the parents the benefit of the doubt, since you really don't know what's going on. These 2 kids were somewhere in the middle, where they weren't the worst as far as their needs not being met, and they weren't the best. They were quiet and just kind of blended in. I really couldn't focus on the 2 that left, because I needed to focus on the kids still present and the problems at hand. However, I was left pondering about the 2 kids who were disenrolled and left under the pretenses of being homeschooled. Once again the school year was winding down, and unfortunately the summer flew by and I was back at school. I also wasn't shocked that the school from grades 1 through 8 only had 1 permanent teacher. The school did a horrible job at teacher recruitment, and none of the new grads wanted to step foot in the school because of the impoverished area. The only consistency the school had was the principal. She had been there for years. She had no time for nothing. She would interview 1 counselor, social worker, only to see them leave after 3 months. The principal was always on the phone putting out whatever fire that needed to be addressed. It was so bad that I had to create my own lesson plans as a substitute teacher, and the principal would blindly approve whatever I wrote down. The school was just complete and utter chaos. Once again, right before Christmas break during roll call for one of the 3rd grade classes, I discovered one of the kids had disenrolled from the school. Almost the same mo, where the kid was one of those kids that just blended in at this school, but would have every government-run agency swarming to ensure the kid was okay at any suburban school. I checked the school records, and the kid's reason for being disenrolled was homeschool, and once again I thought it was really odd a guardian would take that initiative. I wanted to learn the process for a kid to be enrolled as homeschool. I learned that it only required that the guardian fill out the government form, and for the school to keep a copy of the form. I managed to go to where the records were stored for the school. I found the homeschool forms for the 2 kids last year and the 1 kid this year. I was surprised on how formal the homeschool forms were filled out. I was expecting misspelled words with horrible penmanship. I made a copy of the forms because I had learned how horrible it was to retrieve anything from the school. Everything got lost or misplaced. During the Christmas break I decided to follow up on the 3 students. The homeschool forms had their phone numbers and their addresses. I felt extremely awkward, and what I was doing wasn't completely legal. I wanted to avoid calling because what was I going to say? I was your kid's substitute teacher, and So what I did was I parked my car close to where the address listed was given on the form. Which was also extremely awkward, and besides the fear of being in my car in the neighborhood, I felt like everyone was watching me. I sat in that car all day and I didn't see the homeschool kid at all. I did see a few grown-ups come and go, but I didn't see the kid. I decided to go to the next kid's house address that was listed on the homeschool form, and pretty much with the same outcome, and then on to the last kid's house with once again the same outcome. I just left it at that, and the Christmas break was just about over. After the first day back, I decided to muster enough courage and actually call the homeschool kids. 2 of the lines were disconnected and one of the lines rang and rang with no one answering. I couldn't just drop this at this point. I had to take it to the next step and knock on the kid's door. I was beyond petrified on the reception that I would receive at the front door, and to be honest, some of the adults who I saw leaving the homes were downright scary. So, after school with my school ID in hand, I walked to the first homeschool address. I waited a minute before I knocked on the door to talk myself up and muster enough courage that I needed. I knocked and an adult woman answered the door and said, "What do you want?" I mumbled a few words of who I was and then asked how the kid was doing. She looked at me and said, "There ain't no kid here." Then I said, "Do you remember the last time you saw?" She raised her voice, like I said there ain't no kid here, and slammed the door. I decided to go to the next 2 homeschool houses, and once again I basically got the same responses. The next week at school I nonchalantly asked the other kids if they seen or heard from the homeschool kids, and each one pretty much said that before the kids left for homeschool, the only time they saw them was during school time. So, now I was at a dead end. I had taken notes of all the steps I had taken. I re-examined the homeschool forms and pretty much saw what I already knew. The forms' penmanships were very similar. From reading hundreds of handwritten papers, I learned that everyone has their own style, and even if you were to try to conceal a particular way you wrote the letter A, eventually you would slip up in a word and revert back to how you would typically write. That's what I noted in the homeschool forms. They were all different, but if you looked hard enough, you would see similarities. I dug a little deeper and went to the main office to see if anyone recalled what guardian dropped off the homeschool form. I asked the guidance counselor and she said, "I just started 2 weeks ago." And then I just tuned her out. I was just sick of hearing that. At the end of the day, I reluctantly went to the principal. I knew what I was doing wasn't by the rules. It was probably borderline illegal. I remember the principal's hair that day was in every direction and she just looked like she was at her last wit. I explained to her what I was doing regarding the homeschool kids, and I basically asked her if she had any ideas. She didn't say a word and basically just shook her head no, looking completely defeated. Then, the next week started and I went to the office and to drop off my lesson plan. I just happened to see a very poised woman who had to be in her early 70s talking to the guidance counselor. She caught my attention because she mentioned the word homeschool. The woman had a very calming voice, like a very liked kindergarten teacher. She was dressed very nicely and just overall looked very pleasant. Almost like the grandma you wished more of these kids would have. I finally felt relieved and a bit embarrassed. I rarely saw the kids' parents, guardians especially being the substitute teacher. But at least now, I was actually able to see the process with my own eyes. Now it's springtime and I'm doing my typical rotation throughout the school. One day I was doing roll call and one of the kids, I saw a line through their name meaning the kid was no longer at the school. I remembered that kid. Pretty much the same Mo as the previous homeschool kids is being quiet. Emotionally not available. I went down to the records office to see where the latest kid went to. I found the file and saw the homeschool form. I looked at the form and once again the penmanship didn't seem to fit the kid's suspected home life. Once again, I saw the same pattern with the other three. The penmanship on the forms were almost intentionally made to look different. Once more, I was able to match the date on the form with the chance encounter with the elegant-looking woman. In her 70s I had in the near past. Something just wasn't right. I spoke to the guidance counselor and amazingly she was still employed. But she really had no additional information regarding the woman or the kid. Then, I pretty much followed the same steps as the previous three kids and came out with pretty much the same results. The kid wasn't at the address and the phone was disconnected. At this point, I really wanted answers and just some assurance the homeschool kids were okay. I thought to myself, let's face it, it's rare for one of the kids to move on to bigger and better things. It does happen, but it's rare. If the four kids were disenrolled because the parents moved and transferred schools, I would have been like, okay, that's understandable, and then I could just follow up with the new schools if necessary. But with the last homeschool kid, it was just literally days since the kid left to be homeschooled. And no one at the address given on the form had any idea what I was talking about. I checked the initial school records for the homeschool kids when they first enrolled at their school. The forms were typically haphazardly filled out with a lot of information missing. A lot of times, the family members didn't want to give away information because of whatever illegal activities they were involved in. At this point, I had to go the police. I showed up at the police station and waited around for a couple of hours. Finally, one of the detectives met with me. I could tell he was only half listening to me. I think when I said, substitute teacher, was when the detective became disinterested in what I had to say. I showed him the homeschool forms, which he didn't even look at. He said, "Where were you trained to decipher handwriting?" I kind of muttered in embarrassment. He must have looked at his watch 10 times for the 5 minutes I spoke with him. Eventually, I left and there was no business card given to me. He didn't even say give me a call if you find anything else. It was basically get out and thank you for wasting my time. I felt like I was punched in the gut. Nobody cared in what I found or had to say. It was the weekend and I had time to gather my thoughts. I have only been at this school for a short time and was able to pick up the homeschool pattern of kids basically disappearing. I said to myself, there must be countless more homeschool kids possibly in this school alone. Unfortunately, the school didn't have a report. I could run to see what kids were disenrolled as homeschool. So I thought, then I realized the only way was going to be looking through yearbooks. I decided to focus on the years and the grades of the kids I encountered and still should have been in the school. I took as many of the yearbooks I could from the school's basement department. I flipped through yearbooks and quickly ruled out any of the kids who were still enrolled at their school, and I highlighted any kid that I didn't recall seeing. Of the kids I didn't recall seeing, I found about 20 kids. Then, with the 20 names, I painstakingly looked up the names in our school's record department. From the records, about 15 of the kids were listed as transferred. I actually called the schools of the 15 kids and the kids were all fine. Then with the remaining 5 kids, I found something extremely unsettling. I saw the homeschool forms in each one of the 5 kids folders. I now had 5 additional homeschool forms. 2 of the forms it looked like the writer either felt brazen or nearly just got sloppy. Though 2 of the forms were about 5 years apart, the penmanship had way too many similar characteristics. I figured I had to follow up with each of the 5 additional forms as I suspected. At each address I went to listed on the homeschool form. No one had any idea what I was talking about. At this point, I had my folder with all the copies I made and all of my notes. I demanded to meet with the principal and she made available a time and date. I showed up to the meeting with my evidence in hand. I explained again to the principal what I uncovered and the additional 5 homeschool kids who had disappeared. She listened to what I had to say and then she said, "Who told you to do this?" I replied, "Do what?" She said, "Snoop around files. Call parents." "Who told you to do this?" I said, "No one." Then she said I violated multiple school violations and I wasn't allowed back in the school. She made me hand over whatever copies I made and whatever notes I had. I was now out of work. The school year ended. I worked in a retail store that summer that was just downright depressing. I figured with the new school year starting maybe I could find work at a different school in a different district. The school I applied for was just as equally as bad as the previous one. As long as I had a bachelor's degree and no criminal record. Then they would hire you on the spot as a substitute teacher. This year was going to be different. I was there to teach and to be nice to the kids and that's it. I was not going to be a detective. That was over and done with. The school year was breezing by and I was used to going from class to class. I wasn't looking for any patterns. I just did my assignment and then went home. Then it happened. I saw that elegant woman in her 70s. She was talking to the guidance counselor at this new school. My head was in a different dimension. It was like seeing your dead grandmother. I was in complete shock. I just stood there. She had the same calming voice. She was dressed impeccably but not overly showy to draw attention to herself. I was frozen. I could tell she didn't recognize me. I saw her give the homeschool form to the guidance counselor and then she proceeded to exit. I snapped back from my shocked state and I popped my head into the principal's office and said, "I'm not feeling well, I have to go." Then, I quickly got in my car and I followed her. I drove for nearly 2 hours and eventually, she pulled into one of the nicest houses I have ever seen in one of the most richest neighborhoods that I had ever been in. She had a gate that opened and closed electronically. I stayed on the road for a little while just to take notes. There was zero evidence of any kids being on her property. But I did notice a pool company was servicing her pool. Eventually, I saw the pool van leave and I was able to get the name of the company. That same day, I called the same pool company and applied for a job. The pool company was desperate and I lied and told him that I was experienced and I owned my own business for years. All I wanted was to get the company's pool van so I could get through that woman's gate. Within 2 days the pool company gave me a van to drive and an assignment of where to go. It was a Saturday, so I didn't have to worry about missing school. I ignored the pool company's assignment and went right to that woman's house. I got to the gate and used the intercom and explained that we forgot to do something the previous day. She opened the gate and I proceeded to the pool area. I stood by the pool and was just trying to take in everything and was just looking for any type of clues for anything. I knew something just wasn't right. I still saw no kids, so she wasn't a philanthropist trying to help underprivileged kids. I must have stood by the pool for a half an hour in my company-issued pool uniform. The woman eventually came out and very cordially welcomed me. She just had one of those very calming voices and she was very hospitable. I made up some mumble-jumble problem with the pool and then I started to do some small talk to try to get any information about her. I said, "I'm going to try to get this pool fixed as quickly as possible so I could visit my child in the hospital." I said that so she would say something like, "Yeah, I'm a mother," or "I'm a grandmother." I then went on and made up a story about my child having special needs and how involved I was in this non-profit agency, and she had absolutely no follow-up responses. It was like kids to her was a completely different planet. She maintained her nice demeanor the whole time and brushed off anything I said or was completely sympathetic to me for working in a non-profit company. I knew I didn't have much time left and I really had no evidence of anything. Then I realized I had to say something. I said, "Well, let me get this done because I don't want to have to drive 2 hours back here from." And I actually gave the school's name. Then I witnessed something that I have never seen before. I observed a sheep turn into a wolf within a blink of an eye. The cordialness was gone. She said, "Say that again." She didn't say it in her typical voice. It was like she just wanted me to confirm what I said. So I reiterated the school's name. We both looked at each other and I said, "Who are you?" Quote. She just continued to look at me and I said, "Who are you?" Quote. She took off her wig and she now looked like someone in her 50s. She gave me a death stare. She knew I uncovered her. I said, "Where are those kids?" Quote. She didn't say, "I have no idea what you're talking about," or "Excuse me." Quote. She then got on the phone, which she pulled from her blouse pocket, and on the phone she said, "Come right now," and she looked directly at me the whole time like she was going to kill me. At that point, I felt extremely uncomfortable and thought I have all the information I needed. I got into the pool van and I manually forced the front gate opened and left. I was a little relieved that my hunch was right, but I was also extremely afraid. Whoever that woman was, she knew where I worked, and even if I quit my job, the school had my information on file. After returning the pool van, I headed back home. I really needed a few days to compile everything I had and come up with a plan. I actually waited a week and decided to return to that woman's house. I was shaking during the whole 2-hour car ride. From about a block away, I could smell the familiar scent of burnt embers. I knew before pulling up to the gate that her house was gone. I saw one of the neighbors jog by and I asked what happened. Based on the story and the date the neighbor gave me, I realized the woman or somebody else torched the house right after I had left the week before. I asked the neighbor if he knew the woman who lived in the house, and he said besides exchanging casual greetings, he said he knew nothing. He said the house was so completely engulfed in flames there was no way of telling if she died in the fire. I never returned to that school or any other teaching job. All I had was a list of those homeschool kids. Months went by and I figured would never hear anything again regarding those kids. Then I was scrolling through the internet and I came across this court case where a jailhouse rat was looking for leniency based on information she had. The jailhouse rat said that her cellmate confided to her that she sold her kid for drug money and she knew horrible things were going to happen to her kid. But she didn't care because all she cared about was getting drugs. Continuing to read the story from the jailhouse rat, I started to dry heave. Then I actually vomited because the jailhouse rat mentioned the principal from the original school was involved in the child selling scheme. End of story. That is all for today. If you want to support my automated channel, feel free to drop a like and subscribe. See you tomorrow.